There are two groups of people that work to understand the human past: historians and archaeologists. Historians study the human past based on written records, ideally primary sources, that is, things that were created, written at the time of the place they're studying or the time they're studying, or by people who participated in the events. If you want to understand what happened when Mount Vesuvius erupted and destroyed the Roman city of Pompeii, you can go to the writings of Pliny the Younger, who wrote about his experiences and about the eruption and the destruction of the cities. If you're studying the U.S. Constitution, you need to read the Federalist Papers. They were a series of articles written to talk to people about what the new Constitution was going to do and how it was going to affect their lives. If you're studying U.S. history, especially California, you can look at something like this. It's an account by customs officials interviewing a Chinese resident who was going back to China, and he was taking money back to his family. And it talked about his life in the United States, what businesses he was involved with, if he owed anybody any money, which he didn't. Actually, people owed him money. But it gives an idea of what a Chinese resident more than 100 years ago was like in the city of Redlands, California. Historians would also study things like photographs and maps. This particular map is downtown Los Angeles in 1876. Archaeologists study physical culture, that is, things that are made or modified by people. Artifacts are pieces of physical culture that is portable, that you can pick up and study, such as these projectile points or old cans. Archaeologists also study physical culture, large-scale features, things that cannot be moved or easily moved. For instance, this tower is of the old Jamestown Church, Jamestown, Virginia. The next picture down is Pueblo Bonito, what was a 3-story, very large structure that was created more than 100 years before Columbus. And then we have a shell midden. Midden archaeological is for a trash dump. You can pick up the things from a trash dump, you can pick up the shells, but you can't pick up the trash dump. So this is a feature also. Before we excavate, before we collect a single artifact, we do research and create a research plan. This gives us the opportunity to focus what we're going to be doing. We'll look at other archaeological reports in the area. We will look at the known history in the area. We'll look at any old maps and things that we can put together to really focus and decide on how we're going to proceed. We come up with research questions that will focus what specific things are we looking for in this research project. We will decide on what sort of tools we're going to need to use, what sort of expert we need to gather together. All this is done before we do anything else. Here's some typical tools an archaeologist might have out in the field. What do you think is the most important tool in this assemblage, this grouping? It's the notebook. The data we get from excavation is the artifacts and the physical things we see, but more important, or as important, is how we did it, what the process was, the notes on the soil, and everything else that went into the process, because this is part of the context of what we have. We have to know the relationship between one artifact and another, between the artifacts and features, etc. Now, another tool we might use could even be a backhoe, if indeed we have what we call an overburden, or soil on top of our site that we know is not cultural, is not what we're looking for with human activity. So here's a backhoe, and I think probably the archaeologist is the guy with the, you can see kind of the trowel in his pocket there as he's looking at the activity and stuff coming up from the backhoe. We may just do a surface survey depending on where we are and what we're looking for. And that is walking the site and looking what's on the surface. Is there a mound which is not natural, or a depression that's not natural? Are there artifacts right on the surface? Can you see an artifact here? It's a point. It's a projectile point. We don't call arrowheads arrowheads unless we absolutely know that they were put on an arrow, because they could be a projectile point from an atlatl or other delivery device. When artifacts or features are found on the surface, they need to be recorded. We often use GPS coordinates to do this. Sometimes we'll use remote sensing from either air or geophysical studies, where we can actually see underneath the ground to some extent as to what might be there that will guide our process. Okay, here we are on our excavation site. So we have the guy, he's putting soil into a bucket, and this other person over there is over by the wheelbarrow. What do you think he's doing? He's screening. All the soil is going into a screen, so the soil drops through, and we can look at any smaller artifacts that we didn't really see as we were excavating. Here's an archaeologist in her unit. Looks like about a 1 meter by maybe 2 or 3 meters long, using her trowel. We will also have to know where things were found within the archaeological dig, within the excavation. Sometimes it's a simple matter of mapping and measuring with measuring tapes and stuff, and sometimes it's really precise. We want to use a total station. You've seen these out in streets where the people are looking through one, and there's another guy down the way with a stanchion, and they're trying to figure out maybe where a pipeline is, or where a pipeline should go, or something like that, or the measurements for a building site. So once we have our nice pit with straight sidewalls and flat floor, we have to do our mapping. Here's a person what we call profiling, or making a map of the sidewall. We do this because with a nice straight sidewall we can see some activities, some changes in the soil that you don't see when you're actually digging through. So here we have a feature. It says feature 7, and it has some ceramic and charcoal flecks and fire affected rocks in it, and she's putting down what she has seen on the notes as well. For this fire affected rock and charcoal flakes, what do you think that might indicate? It's a hearth or a fire pit. And then also the plot plan, the vertical looking plan, like a traditional map look. So here's a couple of them that have been created. One is a map created by students in our archaeological adventure program. The other is done by a professional archaeologist. Okay, we've recovered the artifacts, we've done all our notes out in the field, our mapping and everything. Now we come back to the lab to try to put together things and find out what all this means. So here Here's an archaeologist, and she's beginning to sort the artifacts as they come from the field, clean them up a little bit. We also may use a microscope to look at how an artifact is put together. We can look at the side of for instance, a sherd, a piece of broken pottery, that we can see the layers of what went into making it, the temper, how do they hold the clay and things together, sort of technology that people had. We can also date the site. Sometimes we date what we call just stratigraphy. Stuff at the top is generally not as old as the stuff down at the bottom. But we can also do radiometric dating. That is, for instance, carbon-14. Everything that was alive has carbon-14 that they inhale and absorb. When something dies, whether it's an animal or plant, that carbon starts breaking down, starts decaying, and we can tell how much carbon is left in something, and it gives an idea of how old it is. If we have a nice piece of wood, in many areas we can do dendrochronology, tree rings, since every year a tree lays down another ring, and it's wide or short depending on how much water and what the growing conditions were. We know what that combination of short ones and long ones and thick ones and thin ones are in specific areas. And we can match that against a master list and figure out when the tree was felled, when it was cut down. Well, we put all this together, but we're not through. We have to do the final report. In all of science, you must report on what you find. If you don't report on it, it's a waste of time, and it's certainly not science. So, we put together the final report, and it has lots of the details, how we went about it, everything we know about it, listing the artifacts and where they were and what their relationships to other artifacts would be. This is a great tool and vital for other archaeologists as they plan their activities. But it's kind of dry reading and technical for the general public. So we also, as archaeologists, need to convey to the general public what happened. We may put things in museum displays. Write books on it that are actually a little more accessible than the formal reports. Magazines. Articles. Websites. Many archaeological sites that have been going on for a while now have websites where the general public can look at what the archaeologists are doing and what they have found. Of course, videos. YouTube is full of videos, some by reputable archaeologists and some by people who just think they're archaeologists. But many reputable archaeologists and archaeological sites have information about what their activities are. But we're still not through. We have to store the artifacts that we find. And the reports we have are also filed with the State Office of Historic Preservation. Because the beginning of one archaeologist project may depend on all this other material that's been done 10, 15, 20 years ago, because they're dealing in the same time period, they're dealing in the same geographic location, so part of their information dovetails into whatever these other archaeologists came up with. So it's a continuous search for what people were doing. So that's a very quick introduction to archaeology. A lot more to learn. Hope this answers some questions for you.